that they strike all of us that way, and that's the difficulty, perhaps, I think, in showing what I'm attempting to show, is that we all do, I think, intuitively value one another. We value persons. We value poetry, creativity, and all of these things. I think we all agree that these are goods. The question is, though, on a naturalistic view, why think that these things are goods? It seems to me that you emphasize in your own book, On the Limits of Morality, the importance of having explanations and not cutting off the search for explanations too soon. And I wonder if you're not cutting off the search for explanations too soon by simply saying, well, I'm just going to regard persons as intrinsically valuable, but without any kind of further grounding for that.
Well, of course, I haven't claimed there is no further grounding for that. I gave you a sketch of the contractarian thought. Your attitude was, I don't find that a very compelling story. It doesn't seem to me to be the kind of thing that constitutes an adequate grounding. Yeah. I suppose these things are in the eyes of the beholder, and everybody here is entitled to decide for themselves what kind of answers will be satisfactory or not.
Let me ask you a different question.
One more.
Oh, okay. Are you a determinist?
Yes.
And yet you still think that love is significant and human choices are morally significant, even though they're determined?
So to give a piece of jargon to the audience that Bill will be familiar with, I'm a compatibilist. That is to say, I believe that one can combine determinism and free will. So absent free will, humans would lack the significance that we clearly have. But I believe that's compatible with determinism. Actually, am I a determinist? Who knows what quantum mechanics teaches us about whether or not determinism is true. But at least I believe that determinism could be true without in any way threatening my conviction that humans are special.
Did you have a follow-up on that one?
Well,
I think you did.
Only to say that it just seems to me to rob moral choices of any sort of significance if we're determined to do it by the antecedent physical causes that lead up to the point of choosing, and then cause our brains to react one way rather than another. I can't see how that could have any more moral significance than a tree growing a branch at a certain point in its development.
Because you're an incompatibilist. You don't believe determinism and free will. So this is a debate for another night. I mean, it's not that I think the truth of compatibilism is at all self-evident.
Can you just explain what that term means?
Compatibilism is the view that there's no logical inconsistency between belief in determinism on the one hand and the existence of free will on the other. They're compatible.
Well, that's a little bit misleading, though. I mean, you need to explain what you mean by free will in that case, if everything's determined.
What I was trying to do is simply give a quick definition. Remember, I said that this is a very, as you know, it's a very, very complicated question. We would basically hijack the entire rest of the evening to start trying
I'm unclear on the terms myself.
Right. So my thought was just that the plausibility of the compatibilist view that I hold, I don't take to be self-evident. I believe it takes philosophical argumentation for it. I completely agree that those drawn to incompatibilism, those drawn to the view that you can't have both deterministic physical laws and robust free will think, if naturalism is true, and the best science teaches us that determinism is true, itself a controversial question whether that's the best interpretation of our best science, then we'll lack free will. And then if free will is necessary for having special value, then we'll lack special value. But there's a lot of premises before we get to the conclusion that naturalism doesn't have space for this special value, and I reject several of those premises, which is why I'm not feeling uncomfortable by the challenge that Bill's raising.
Well, let's turn the table, and now you'll ask Bill some questions.
All right. So one of the things that you said in your opening remarks, you quoted several people. I think there was a long quote from Michael Roos saying something like, if naturalism is true, if theism is false, then ethics is illusory, deeper meaning is illusory. That's not an exact quote, but I think those phrases were there. And I found that an interesting slide, or so it seemed to me. the move from ethics is illusory to deeper meaning is illusory. I think I want to concede that in the way you mean deeper meaning, I don't believe in deeper meaning. Because I think when you talk that way, you think for there to, not that I have any trouble talking about meaning or even deep meaning, but when you talk that way, I think you're thinking it's got to be meaning on a cosmic scale. That's where some of the points about accountability come in as well.
Yes.
So, fine, I believe that humans are just creatures that evolved on this tiny little speck of dust. But I don't see how the denial of deeper meaning should give me any reason to think, therefore I'm committed to ethics as illusory. So perhaps you could explain that.
Where that came in, I think, was with respect to moral accountability. Yes, and also with regard to the significance of human beings. It seemed to me that on a naturalistic worldview, everything is ultimately destined to destruction in the heat death of the universe. As the universe expands, it grows colder and colder as its energy is used up. And eventually all the stars will burn out, all matter will collapse into dead stars and black holes. There will be no life, no heat, no light, only the corpses of dead stars and galaxies expanding into endless darkness. And in light of that end, it's hard for me to understand how our moral choices have any sort of significance. There's no moral accountability. The universe is neither better nor worse for what we do. That ultimately there isn't, our moral lives become vacuous because they don't have that kind of cosmic significance.
I still need to have you explain that for me better, because again, it seems to me it's one thing to say it lacks eternal, cosmic, everlasting significance. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to say it lacks significance. In fact, to give one of your examples, you talked about, again, I don't remember the source of this quote, but the torturers, was it Nazi torturers?
Right, yeah.
And you say, if theism isn't true, then it doesn't really matter. This strikes me as, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's going to sound rude, but it strikes me as an outrageous thing to suggest. It doesn't really matter? Surely it matters to the torture victims whether they're being tortured. It doesn't require that this makes some cosmic difference to the eternal significance of the universe for it to matter whether a human being is tortured. It matters to them. It matters to their family. It matters to us. So again, how do you move from the lack of eternal significance to the thought that if it doesn't have eternal significance, it can't have any significance?
Because the victim, it obviously matters to him in the sense that he's in pain and agony. But ultimately, it doesn't matter that he was ever in pain and in agony. The whole thing just degenerates into utter meaninglessness and insignificance. I don't mean to suggest that the torture didn't do a bad thing to this person, but ultimately, it doesn't matter. It all ends up the same.
Yes, but it all ending up the same isn't the same thing as, and so it doesn't matter what happens until we get there. And when I say, and it matters what the path is before we get to the end point, I don't merely mean subjectively it matters, it appears to matter, it matters to them, but it doesn't really matter.
Well, and that's what it seems to me. It just matters subjectively.
But again, I just want to say, I don't understand how we get from, if it doesn't objectively matter to the universe, or doesn't objectively matter on a cosmic scale, how do we get from that to, so it doesn't objectively matter at all?
Well, remember...
So it's not a point about the nature of objective. It's the question is, why should we think objective value must be on the cosmic scale or not there at all?
Now, let's remember the argument. This concern arose in the third point about moral accountability. This wasn't in the first 2 points about objective moral values and duties. What I said was, with regard to the third point, even if objective moral values and duties exist, they become irrelevant because they're inconsequential. So my third point about moral accountability was simply to say, on atheism, even if there are objective right and wrong and good and evil, there's no moral accountability, and so one might as well just live as he pleases. And
might as well. It might as well means there's no reason to live one way versus the other unless it makes a difference on the cosmic scale. It just seems to me that the same questions being, to my ear,